key headline is extraordinary. The fact that basically he underestimated the scale of the potential crash, he says. Overall, he was not nearly cautious enough on marking to market some of the tokens on the various platforms. He thinks the US team took some assets offline, and he says there was improper access to FTX post-spiral. What really stood out for you?
There are a few things here. I want to talk about the timeline of events because that is something that Andrew Ross Sorkin is drilling in on very deeply. If you all remember, there was a series of tweets. There was a tweet November 7th that he had deleted about the assets being fine. Now, he did say that on November 6th, he started to become nervous that FTX would not be able to fill customer withdrawals. These timelines are really important here, Caroline, because at the end of the day, and Sorkin also asked this, is his lawyers okay with him being up there speaking about this? This will all be cataloged and looked at the end of the day when you look at what happened here at FTX, both in November as well as the full year. Now, the full year, as far as what he had to say, he's really been trying to draw a very big distance between himself and his role at FTX and Alameda, and is, really apologizing for not knowing and saying maybe he should have known. But Sorkin is also drilling in here very much so on why there seemingly was joint roles when it came to assets that they both seem to have some exposure to. When I say they both, I mean both Alameda as well as Sam Bankman-Fried, who is a large owner of Alameda, as we know. So a lot of questions here, muddy answers, but a lot of questions still to be worked through. This interview is not over yet.
I don't want to give away any of sort of the magic of television, but when Caroline and I were waiting to come on air, there was this question of, is he going to turn up? And if he did turn up virtually, but as you said, he was asked, what do your lawyers think about this? And he said, I probably shouldn't say anything. He is saying a lot of things, and one of the things he's talking about is a term I haven't heard in a long time, commingling, the relationship basically between FTX and Alameda and the crossover of client funds. What was his response on that?
This is a very important response, and I'm reading you the sentence. I didn't knowingly commingle funds. Why is that an important statement? Because at the end of the day, I wasn't trying to commingle funds, he said. I did not ever try to commit fraud on anybody. So we're going to be looking at the series of events as things go on, as well as intent there. So that is something that he had said that day. You were asking about the Bahamas as well. This is interesting. He was asked about why certain Alameda employees had worked together. He had said he had not been living there recently. We don't know how long he has or has not been living there. He had also said that he would not be surprised if sometime I am up there talking about what happened with our representatives meaning U.S. representatives in that statement. He said he has been in the Bahamas for the last year. As we know, though, before this crisis had happened, he had been between the Bahamas and the U.S. He had been in D.C. a lot. I was in D.C. talking to him just weeks ago, really, before this implosion had happened. And he said he'd been running between FTX and the Bahamas, running from FTX in the Bahamas. But he does say that he was asked about his concern about criminal liability here. He said he had a bad month, but what matters here is millions of customers. He did not really give a straight answer about whether the criminal liability is the reason why he is not coming to the United States in person.
Yeah, he says he thinks he could travel to the US and staying silent won't accomplish any good. I mean, I have to say, I've almost vaguely had a little chuckle about commingling because it came straight after a headline about the fact that a few of them lived all together, and I couldn't work out which bit was commingling. But overall, Sonali, do you think it ends up being a wise decision on Sam Bankman-Fried's part to have taken part in this conversation? He overall is saying FTX did unimpactful things to bolster his own image.
I have a lot of questions here again about some of the things he's saying, because on one hand here, you can definitely see him trying to distance himself from the Alameda roles to the FTX roles, which is where the commingling question really comes in. There are a lot of questions here about BlockFi and the collateral between BlockFi and FTX. Again, BlockFi's relationship was both with Alameda and FTX. So what he knew and didn't know, there are certain things he should have known as the CEO of FTX. He's also speaking about the relationship with Genesis as they tried to pull funds as well. So a lot of unanswered questions here, to your point about, when you look back at this, and is he going to be glad if he spoke publicly? specifically. On one hand, he's distancing himself and trying to give his version of the series of events here in real time as the bankruptcy is going on in the United States. One really interesting part of this also is Andrew Ross Sorkin asked very specifically about whether he worked with the Bahamas as well when it came to any transfers. And he said he wouldn't answer any specifics of that, but he did point to the fact that Bahamas were a key regulator for them, and as well as the joint provisional liquidators here. So a lot of questions also, not just about Sam Bankman-Fried and his role at both of these places, but also about his relationship with U.S. regulators as well as the Bahamian ones still.